You begin not with shouting, but with a kind of distant thunder. Above you, the city of Berlin is breaking open. You do not see the skyline, the smoke, or the collapsing facades. You feel them. The vibrations arrive first as a faint suggestion, a low growl that moves through stone and soil. It threads itself into the foundations, follows service tunnels and old cellars, and finally reaches the place where you stand, a bunker buried deep beneath the capital of a dying regime. Down here, sound behaves differently. Before you follow the silence deeper into these corridors, take a moment to subscribe, only if calm, whispered history feels like a place you want to return to. And if you wish, tell us where you're listening from, or which moment tonight lingers with you the most. You're listening to echoes of war. Explosions are softened, not erased. They arrive as blunt thuds, as if someone far away is closing enormous doors again and again. The sharpness of war is dulled by layers of concrete, but its weight remains. Every impact presses faintly into the walls, into the floor, into your ribs. You follow a corridor lit by weak, artificial light. The air is dry and slightly stale, touched with a mixed sense of metal, paper, and the faint, sour trace of too many bodies sharing too little space. Ventilation hums somewhere out of sight, not loud enough to be comforting, just constant enough to remind you that the outside air no longer belongs to the people inside. The architecture feels designed for certainty. Thick walls, low ceilings, doors reinforced with steel. Everything here was meant to say, nothing can reach you. But as you walk, you can tell that promise has already begun to fray. On the walls hang maps that have been touched too often. Borders, front lines, arrows once drawn with a firm hand now look more like memory than command. Some pins have been removed entirely, leaving bare holes in the paper like tiny absences, small confirmations that territory once claimed is now just silence and distance. You are not part of these decisions. You are not giving orders, not receiving them. You are a witness moving through the last days of a closed world. Footsteps pass you in the hallway, an orderly carrying a stack of messages, an officer whose uniform remains immaculate but whose shoulders no longer do. They walk with the practiced rhythm of routine, but their eyes flicker in a different tempo, faster, searching, always measuring something you cannot quite see. Here, underground, time feels strange. Clocks mark the hours, but the hours no longer correspond to anything outside. Day and night have lost their meaning. The bunker follows its own pulse. Reports, briefings, meals taken quickly, rest that never becomes real sleep. The city above glows and burns and darkens according to its own cycle, but down here the light is always the same pale shade of artificial. The atmosphere is one that is not yet panicked, and no longer confident either. It is something narrower, thinner, a stretched tension that refuses to snap, even though everything around it is beginning to fail. People still speak with official words and practiced tones, yet there is a hollowness behind them, as if the sentences themselves already know they are not being believed. Far down the corridor, you glimpse the doorways that lead deeper. Briefing rooms, workspaces, small private quarters carved out of concrete. Each room holds its own climate of anxiety. A low murmur here, a sharp phrase there, quickly swallowed back into quiet. Papers being signed without anyone truly expecting them to matter. This place was built to be the last center of control. Now it feels like a pocket of delayed reality. The war outside is already decided in broad strokes. Fronts have collapsed, armies are retreating or surrendering, cities have fallen. But in these rooms, decisions continue to be made, as if the right combination of words could bend what is already broken. Small details that betray the truth more than any proclamation can be noticed. A pencil that hovers over a line on a map just a second too long. A hand that reaches for a document and briefly trembles before closing around it. A uniform coat hung on a hook with its sleeves twisted, abandoned in haste or exhaustion. No one names the collapse. Not yet. It leaks in through half-finished sentences and unfinished gestures. Another distant impact rolls through the structure, a slightly deeper tremor this time. Dust shifts almost invisibly in the corners. Somewhere above, another building has ceased to exist in the shape it held that morning. Down here, only the vibration reaches you, one more reminder that the ground itself is no longer stable. You step into a larger room, the closest thing this underground world has to a heart. Tables are covered with maps, telephones, and carefully arranged stacks of paper. Lamps throw small cones of light onto the surfaces, leaving the corners in a soft, permanent dusk. People move around the room in measured paths, speaking in low voices, leaning over documents, tracing routes that no longer exist on the earth they depict. Even without recognizing the names of towns or units, you hear the strain. Sentences trail off. Explanations bend back on themselves. Plans are repeated with tiny variations, as if repeating them might finally make them solid. The room is full of sound, yet none of it feels anchored. It is here, in this dim space of half-voices and flickering lamps, that a small, quiet thought settles. In the past, this bunker was likely loud. Orders barked, telephones ringing sharply, boots striking the floor with certainty. Now, the volume has dropped. There is movement, but it has the quality of people performing a ritual they no longer believe in, afraid of what will happen if they simply stop. You realize that you have arrived at the story not at its height, but in its descent. This is not a tale of rising power or triumphant advance. It is the study of a collapse told from the inside out. The ceilings press low. The air carries the faint heat of too many bodies and too much waiting. There is no window you can look through, no view of the city except the one imagined from muffled sounds and distant reports. Down here, you are enclosed in the final shape of a regime that built itself on certainty, and now must face the moment when certainty cannot be sustained. Above, Berlin burns and breaks. Below, in these concrete rooms, something more subtle is happening. The noise is beginning to change. Not yet fading completely, that will come later, but losing its edges, its confidence, its sharpness. You can feel the first soft encroachment of silence at the margins of every sound. In pauses between footsteps, in the small hush after a report is delivered, in the way people look at closed doors and seem to listen for something they no longer expect to hear. You are entering the last days in the bunker beneath Berlin, days when tension tightens, hope thins, and reality presses in from every side, days when the outside world is collapsing loudly, and the inside world is collapsing quietly. You stand at the threshold of this underground silence, ready to follow it from its first uneasy stirrings to the heavy quiet that will outlive everyone who walks these halls. The weight of a collapsing world. You move deeper into the bunker and begin to understand that this place is no longer functioning as a command center. It feels more like a vessel holding the last fragments of a world already dissolving above ground. Every room you pass carries its own shade of tension, some sharp and brittle, others soft and exhausted. The further you walk, the more the air changes. It carries a heaviness that does not come from dust or heat. It comes from knowledge, unspoken, shared, and unavoidable. People try to keep moving with purpose, but the purpose has thinned. A courier delivers a message no one really wants to read. A staff officer smooths the front of his uniform again and again, the gesture mechanical, unnecessary, but grounding. Two technicians stand beside a radio set, adjusting knobs with careful precision, even though the static tells them more than any incoming report could. These are the final behaviors of a system trying to hold itself together by imitation alone. Another low tremor rolls through the ground. It's slower this time, a deep vibration that travels through the soles of your shoes and lingers just long enough to remind you of the vastness of the destruction above. You imagine entire blocks shifting into rubble, streets folding in on themselves, fire drifting across open squares like wind-blown cloth. But the people here do not look up. There is no up to look toward. All directions lead only to more concrete. You notice how the bunker absorbs emotion. Raised voices vanish quickly. Footsteps that once echoed sharply now fade into a soft, muted rhythm. It feels as though the walls have begun drinking sound, pulling it inward, swallowing it, and leaving behind a hush that grows heavier with every passing hour. You sense that this is how collapses often end, not with a final explosion, but with a gradual thickening of quiet. You enter a narrow passage lined with doors. Some are open, some are shut. From one room comes the faint scratch of a pencil marking a report that will likely never be read. From another, the low churn of a generator laboring to keep the lights alive a few hours longer. Behind a closed door, someone sits in absolute stillness, their shadow unmoving beneath the frame. You turn a corner and step into a small chamber where a single lamp casts a pale, trembling glow. Beneath it lies a map spread wide across a table. The edges curl upward as if trying to detach themselves from the reality they depict. On the map, front lines have folded back almost to the city's doorstep. Rivers and towns once marked confidently now seem like distant memories, barely relevant to the shrinking circle of earth represented in these rooms. Beside the table sits a cup of coffee gone cold long ago. Its surface is still, untouched. The small details feel louder than the silence itself. For a moment, you simply stand and listen to the bunker breathe. The faint hum of machinery, the distant mutter of voices, the soft creak of metal as someone shifts their weight in a chair. It is not the sound of control. It is the sound of people holding their breath without realizing it. You feel the subtle emotional current that runs through the bunker. Not panic, not despair, but a bone-deep weariness. A recognition that the story unfolding here has passed a point beyond rescue, and what remains is only the slow descent toward an ending no one can name out loud. A sense settles over you. You are witnessing the world closing in on itself. The ceilings feel lower. The corridors seem narrower. The air tastes faintly metallic, as if the walls themselves are exhaling old secrets. And then, in the middle of this dim, compressed space, another thought arrives, quiet but firm. You are here at the moment when history stops pretending it can change. Everything that comes next will unfold inside this deepening quiet. In a few steps, you will leave the introductory corridors behind. The story will narrow. The tension will tighten. The silence will thicken. You move toward the heart of the bunker once more, ready to enter the first chapter, where maps begin to lose their meaning, and the distance between belief and reality grows wide enough to swallow whole worlds. Maps losing their meaning. The war room feels smaller than memory suggests, not in size, but in purpose. Maps cling to the walls like faded promises, their once bold lines softened by too many hands, too many revisions. The air is thick with paper dust, graphite, and a tension that refuses to settle. A long table commands the center of the room. From a distance, its arrangement might be mistaken for order. Neatly aligned telephones, ordered stacks of reports, markers placed with care. But a closer look reveals the truth. The precision serves habit, not utility. One of the maps is pinned wide across a board. Its surface is a mosaic of front lines and arrows, many drawn months ago, each pointing toward a world that no longer exists in the form it describes. Some arrows aim at towns reduced to rubble. Some lines defend positions already abandoned. A few pins hang crookedly, their colors dulled, marking the slow decay of certainty itself. Around the table, officers move with the caution of people preserving ritual. A pin is shifted a few millimeters, then replaced. A pencil travels the length of a river but leaves no mark. A report is reviewed, but the reader flips the same page twice, as if movement itself were the final remaining duty. Their faces carry the quiet realization that the maps are no longer maps. They are relics. A telephone buzzes softly, a sound absorbed by the concrete before it can assert urgency. The officer who answers listens for a moment, nods once, then sets the receiver down with an expression stripped of surprise. No announcement follows. Whatever news has arrived carries no new shape. A wall-mounted chart lists divisions and regiments in tight columns. Some names have been neatly crossed out, others overwritten, entire units erased by a single stroke. One entry has been edited so often that the original designation is nearly invisible beneath the layers, a unit dissolved not only in the field, but in memory. A soft scratching draws attention. A clerk at the far end of the table works through a ledger, writing a line, pausing and striking it out, writing another, pausing again, and drawing another line through it. The rhythm is slow, resigned. He is recording a story that unravels faster than ink can describe. Harsh lamps cast stark shadows across the maps, turning mountain ranges into jagged silhouettes, and river valleys into deep bruises. The shadows grant the maps an illusion of depth even as their meaning collapses. A comment about reinforcements floats briefly across the room, carrying hope more out of habit than conviction. No reply follows. The words evaporate before touching the air. At the edge of the room sits a stack of untouched documents, a faint layer of dust gathering across their corners. Hours have passed without anyone reaching for them. In a place meant for constant movement, inactivity speaks louder than reports. The room performs its rituals because stopping would mean acknowledging the truth too plainly. Orders, updates, annotations, these motions preserve the shape of purpose. Long after purpose itself has thinned, a distant explosion sends a soft tremor through the walls. Dust rises, dances briefly in the lamplight, and settles again. A pin falls from one of the boards, landing with a subtle metallic tap. No one bends to retrieve it. The maps hold their silence, revealing without saying so that the war's direction no longer rests here. They mark borders only in memory, boundaries abandoned, positions dissolved, intentions fading. Nothing in this room guides the world anymore. Everything merely reflects its collapse. The corridor outside seems to pull gently, inviting the next descent, from the demise of strategy, to the breaking city above. When the lines become ghosts. The far side of the war room holds older maps, heavy sheets, worn at the edges, their surface marked by smudges of ink and countless revisions. They hang across the walls like dim recollections, their authority softened by time and the relentless grind of events. One map in particular dominates the space. Its symbols and arrows once defined the movements of armies, the rise and fall of entire fronts. Now the markings feel distant, a ghostly record of intentions that no longer hold shape. Nearby, a group of officers studies another chart. Their expressions reveal what their silence tries to conceal. The symbols before them represent units that no longer exist in the form the map suggests. Yet the markers remain untouched, as if erasing them might sever the final thread connecting the present to the illusion of control. A courier enters, delivering a folded slip of paper. The message is accepted with the solemnity of something important. Yet it is pocketed without being read aloud. Information has ceased to inform. Its purpose now is simply to arrive. The bunker's atmosphere shifts subtly in this space. Silence grows heavier, not from absence but from overuse, a silence repeatedly chosen to avoid naming what the maps already reveal. A row of untouched maps lies stacked on a shelf, corners crisp, colors vibrant. They belong to a future that will never be drawn. No one reaches for them. Instead, an older map remains pinned to the wall, its lines outdated but familiar. Habit outweighs accuracy. A radio crackles softly in the background, fragments of a message rising and falling beneath static. Someone adjusts the dial, but the interference swallows every attempt. After a moment, the hand drops from the equipment, and the static continues its quiet dominance. The room feels suspended, not still, but waiting for something that cannot arrive. A pencil rolls off a table and clatters softly to the floor. The sound reverberates with surprising clarity, drawing brief glances from those nearby. The moment passes. No one retrieves the pencil. A senior officer stands near a windowless wall, gaze unfocused, breathing in the slow, deliberate rhythm of someone trying to steady a mind under strain. His uniform remains immaculate, but beneath the fabric, fatigue settles like sediment. A staff member reorganizes a stack of reports, lining up the corners with meticulous care. The precision is unnecessary. The reports themselves have lost relevance. But the act of aligning paper offers a small ritual of order in a place starved of it. A long vibration moves through the bunker, a collapse somewhere above, a floor giving way, a block shifting under artillery's weight. Shadows tremble across the walls, and the pins on the nearest map tremble with them. When the vibration fades, the silence feels different, not restored but deepened. Something in the room loosens. Something in the collective posture softens. The truth has seeped in one breath at a time, dulling the last edge of denial. No one says it. No one needs to. The maps have become ghosts, and the world they depict has already faded beyond their borders. The corridor outside awaits, leading toward the breaking city above, and into the quiet unraveling of everything below. A city breaking open. A narrow chamber near the edge of the bunker brings the outside world closer than any other place below ground. Cooler air slips through hairline cracks in the concrete, carrying with it the faintest trace of smoke, a ghost of the burning city above. The first sound that arrives is not sharp, but deep, a rolling thunder that travels downward through soil and steel. Each impact softens as it reaches the lower levels, transforming artillery into slow, heavy tremors that move through the ribs rather than the ears. The bunker absorbs the violence like a vast muted drum. Explosions lose their edges on the descent, becoming pressure rather than noise. It feels like listening to a storm from underwater, where every sound is altered by distance and depth. Another tremor passes, dust shifting in tiny drifts from the corners of the ceiling. Someone murmurs a remark about proximity, but conversation has become too fragile to sustain. Words collapse more easily than buildings now. A rhythm of impacts begins, not random, not frantic, but deliberate, methodical, the kind of shelling that walks its way along streets already crippled by rubble and fire. Through the faint draft in the chamber, the scent of burning wood mixes with scorched metal, traveling downward in thin tendrils that barely survive the journey. It is enough to reveal the scale of destruction above. Somewhere in the distance, small arms fire cracks faintly beneath the thunder of artillery. The two sounds merge, forming a layered pulse that speaks of fighting now occurring frighteningly close. A messenger arrives with a folded slip of paper. The message is delivered quietly, handed over with a formality that feels hollow. Reading it changes nothing. Not reading it would change nothing either. Information has become a ritual rather than a tool. A longer, deeper strike quakes through the bunker's structure. The generator flickers, lights dimming, the air trembling as though the building itself shuddered. The vibration subsides slowly, leaving behind a silence filled with unsaid thoughts. Somewhere above, an entire block has changed shape. The bunker stands firm, but the illusion of security no longer holds. No structure feels invulnerable when the city above is dissolving into smoke and shifting debris. The faint metallic ticking from the pipes overhead grows more frequent, a network of steel under strain, passing along warnings too numerous to track. A sense settles over the space. Berlin is not merely being battered. It is breaking open, layer by layer, and every tremor that reaches this chamber carries the weight of a world collapsing through its final hours. When the sky comes down. The corridor outside feels subtly changed, as if each new tremor above has pressed the air a little thinner. Movement slows. Voices drop to murmurs. The bunker breathes in shallow, uneven rhythms. A series of sharp detonations ripples downward, closer than before. The impacts arrive in quick succession, each one sending a delicate cascade of dust drifting from the ceiling. A metal cup rolls off a table and clinks softly against the floor. No one retrieves it. The sound hangs in the air a moment longer than expected, before dissolving back into the growing quiet. A faint draft wafts from a damaged ventilation duct, carrying a thin veil of smoke, just enough to sting the nose, just enough to mark the presence of open flames somewhere above. Images form unbidden, roofs torn away, walls folded into streets, tram lines twisted like broken wire. The city's geometry is collapsing into a landscape of rubble and fire. Footsteps approach from deeper within the bunker. A young officer moves quickly, breath uneven, papers trembling against his chest. He disappears into a side room, and a brief exchange of low voices follows, voices that fall quiet almost immediately. The next explosion is different. Lower, heavier, a structural collapse rather than a strike. The floor trembles beneath the weight of it, a ripple moving through the reinforced concrete in a long, rolling wave. The lights flicker. Once, then again. A pipe overhead releases a strained groan, the sound of metal forced against its limits. No one reacts. Even warnings have become part of the air. A room near the corridor holds two communications staff listening to a radio's static. The signal hisses through the speaker, the faint outline of a voice flickering at the edges before dissolving again. The operator adjusts the dial with slow, measured motions, not in hope of clarity, but in duty to habit. The static continues its soft dominance. No notes are taken. Farther along, a sealed steel barrier stands where a window once existed. Soot collects at the edges, bearing the imprint of fingerprints from the last person who closed it. Whoever stood at that window saw Berlin's final days unfold in raw, unfiltered light, before sealing the bunker forever. The steel plate carries warmth. Heat radiates through it, rising from the burning city above. A deeper, rolling collapse travels through the ground. The tremor shakes dust from beams, shifts small objects, and echoes in the hollow spaces beneath the floor. A single word slips from someone's lips, not fear, not surprise, but recognition, closer. The tremor fades into a heavy, anticipatory stillness. Above ground, the sky is falling in slow, destructive waves. Below, the bunker feels each movement as a muted memory, a softened echo of structures folding into themselves. Berlin is not simply falling. It is unmaking itself. One street at a time. One block at a time. one vibration at a time. And the bunker, once a stronghold of certainty, now feels the pressure of a world collapsing directly above its ceiling. Maps losing their meaning. The war room feels smaller than memory suggests, not in size, but in purpose. Maps cling to the walls like faded promises, their once bold lines softened by too many hands and too many revisions. The air is thick with paper dust, graphite, and a tension that refuses to settle. A long table commands the center of the room. From a distance, its arrangement might be mistaken for order. Neatly aligned telephones, ordered stacks of reports, markers placed with care. But a closer look reveals the truth. The precision serves habit, not utility. One of the maps is pinned wide across a board. Its surface is a mosaic of front lines and arrows, many drawn months ago, each pointing toward a world that no longer exists in the form it describes. Some arrows aim at towns reduced to rubble. Some lines defend positions already abandoned. A few pins hang crookedly, their colors dulled, marking the slow decay of certainty itself. Around the table, officers move with the caution of people preserving ritual. A pin is shifted a few millimeters, then replaced. A pencil travels the length of a river but leaves no mark. A report is reviewed, but the reader flips the same page twice, as if movement itself were the final remaining duty. Their faces carry the quiet realization that the maps are no longer maps. They are relics. A telephone buzzes softly, a sound absorbed by the concrete before it can assert urgency. The officer who answers listens for a moment, nods once, then sets the receiver down with an expression stripped of surprise. No announcement follows. Whatever news has arrived carries no new shape. A wall-mounted chart lists divisions and regiments in tight columns. Some names have been neatly crossed out, others overwritten, entire units erased by a single stroke. One entry has been edited so often that the original designation is nearly invisible beneath the layers. A unit dissolved not only in the field but in memory. A soft scratching draws attention. A clerk at the far end of the table works through a ledger, writing a line, pausing and striking it out. Writing another, pausing again, and drawing another line through it. The rhythm is slow, resigned. He is recording a story that unravels faster than ink can describe. Harsh lamps cast stark shadows across the maps, turning mountain ranges into jagged silhouettes and river valleys into deep bruises. The shadows grant the maps an illusion of depth even as their meaning collapses. A comment about reinforcements floats briefly across the room, carrying hope more out of habit than conviction. No reply follows. The words evaporate before touching the air. At the edge of the room sits a stack of untouched documents, a faint layer of dust gathering across their corners. Hours have passed without anyone reaching for them. In a place meant for constant movement, inactivity speaks louder than reports. The room performs its rituals because stopping would mean acknowledging the truth too plainly. Orders, updates, annotations. These motions preserve the shape of purpose long after purpose itself has thinned. A distant explosion sends a soft tremor through the walls. Dust rises, dances briefly in the lamplight, and settles again. A pin falls from one of the boards, landing with a subtle metallic tap. No one bends to retrieve it. The maps hold their silence, revealing without saying so that the war's direction no longer rests here. They mark borders only in memory, boundaries abandoned, positions dissolved, intentions fading. Nothing in this room guides the world anymore. Everything merely reflects its collapse. The corridor outside seems to pull gently, inviting the next descent, from the demise of strategy to the breaking city above. When the lines become ghosts. The far side of the war room holds older maps, heavy sheets worn at the edges, their surface marked by smudges of ink and countless revisions. They hang across the walls like dim recollections, their authority softened by time and the relentless grind of events. One map, in particular, dominates the space. Its symbols and arrows once defined the movements of armies, the rise and fall of entire fronts. Now the markings feel distant, a ghostly record of intentions that no longer hold shape. Nearby, a group of officers studies another chart. Their silence reveals what their expressions attempt to conceal. The symbols before them represent units that no longer exist in the form the map suggests. Yet the markers remain untouched, as if erasing them might sever the final thread connecting the present to the illusion of control. A courier enters, delivering a folded slip of paper. The message is accepted with the solemnity of something important, yet it is pocketed without being read aloud. Information has ceased to inform. Its purpose is now simply to arrive. The bunker's atmosphere shifts subtly in this space. Silence grows heavier, not from absence but from overuse, a silence repeatedly chosen to avoid naming what the maps already reveal. A row of untouched maps lies stacked on a shelf, corners crisp, colors vibrant. They belong to a future that will never be drawn. No one reaches for them. Instead, an older map remains pinned to the wall, outdated but familiar. Habit outweighs accuracy. A radio crackles softly in the background, fragments of a message rising and falling beneath static. Someone adjusts the dial without expectation. The interference swallows every attempt, and the static continues its quiet dominance. The room feels suspended, not still, but waiting for something that cannot arrive. A pencil rolls off a table and clatters softly to the floor. The sound reverberates with surprising clarity, drawing brief glances that fade quickly. No one retrieves it. A senior officer stands near a blank stretch of wall, gaze unfocused, breathing in the slow, deliberate rhythm of someone steadying a mind stretched thin. His uniform remains immaculate, but beneath the surface, fatigue settles like sediment. A staff member reorganizes a stack of reports, aligning the corners with unnecessary precision, a small ritual of order in a place starved of it. A long vibration moves through the bunker, shadows trembling across the walls, pins shivering inside their boards. When the tremor fades, the silence feels different, not restored but deepened. Something in the room loosens. Something in the collective posture softens. Truth seeps in one breath at a time, dulling the last edge of denial. No one says it. No one needs to. The maps have become ghosts, and the world they depict has already faded beyond their borders. The corridor outside awaits, leading toward the breaking city above and into the quiet unraveling of everything below. A city breaking open. A narrow chamber near the edge of the bunker brings the outside world closer than any other place below ground. Cooler air slips through hairline cracks in the concrete, carrying with it the faintest trace of smoke, a ghost of the burning city above. The first sound that arrives is not sharp, but deep, a rolling thunder that travels downward through soil and steel. Each impact softens as it reaches the lower levels, transforming artillery into slow, heavy tremors that move through the ribs rather than the ears. The bunker absorbs the violence like a vast muted drum. Explosions lose their edges on the descent, becoming pressure rather than noise. It feels like listening to a storm from underwater, where every sound is altered by distance and depth. Another tremor passes, dust shifting in tiny drifts from the corners of the ceiling. Someone murmurs a remark about proximity, but conversation has become too fragile to sustain. Words collapse more easily than buildings now. A rhythm of impacts begins, not random, not frantic, but deliberate, methodical, the kind of shelling that walks its way down streets already crippled by rubble and fire. Through the faint draft in the chamber, the scent of burning wood mixes with scorched metal, traveling downward in thin tendrils that barely survive the journey. It is enough to reveal the scale of destruction above. Somewhere in the distance, small arms fire cracks beneath the thunder of artillery. The two sounds merge, forming a layered pulse that speaks of fighting now occurring frighteningly close. A messenger arrives with a folded slip of paper. The message is delivered quietly, handed over with a formality that feels hollow. Reading it changes nothing. Not reading it would change nothing either. Information has become a ritual rather than a tool. A longer, deeper strike quakes through the bunker's structure. The generator flickers, lights dimming, the air trembling as though the building itself shuddered. The vibration subsides slowly, leaving behind a silence filled with unsaid thoughts. Somewhere above, an entire block has changed shape. The bunker stands firm, but the illusion of security no longer holds. No structure feels invulnerable when the city above is dissolving into smoke and shifting debris. The faint metallic ticking from the pipes overhead grows more frequent, a network of steel under strain, passing along warnings too numerous to track. A sense settles over the space. Berlin is not merely being battered, it is breaking open layer by layer. And every tremor that reaches this chamber carries the weight of a world collapsing through its final hours. When the sky comes down. The corridor outside feels subtly changed, as if each new tremor above has pressed the air a little thinner. Movement slows, voices drop to murmurs, and the bunker breathes in shallow, uneven rhythms. A series of sharp detonations ripples downward, closer than before. The impacts arrive in quick succession, each one sending a delicate cascade of dust drifting from the ceiling. A metal cup rolls off a table and clinks softly against the floor. No one retrieves it. The sound hangs in the air a moment longer than expected before dissolving back into the growing quiet. A faint draft wafts from a damaged ventilation duct, carrying a thin veil of smoke, just enough to sting the nose, just enough to mark the presence of open flames somewhere above. Images form unbidden, roofs torn away, walls folded into streets, tram lines twisted like broken wire. The city's geometry is collapsing into a landscape of rubble and fire. Footsteps approach from deeper within the bunker. A young officer moves quickly, breath uneven, papers trembling against his chest. He disappears into a side room, and a brief exchange of low voices follows, voices that fall quiet almost immediately. The next explosion is different, lower, heavier, a structural collapse rather than a strike. The floor trembles beneath the weight of it, a ripple moving through the reinforced concrete in a long, rolling wave. The lights flicker once, then again. A pipe overhead releases a strained groan, metal forced against its limits. No one reacts. Even warnings have become part of the air. A room near the corridor holds two communications staff listening to a radio's static. The signal hisses through the speaker, the faint outline of a voice flickering at the edges before dissolving again. The operator adjusts the dial with slow, measured motions, not in hope of clarity, but in duty to habit. The static continues its soft dominance. No notes are taken. Farther along, a sealed steel barrier stands where a window once existed. Soot collects at the edges, bearing the imprint of fingerprints from the last person who closed it. Whoever stood at that window saw Berlin's final days unfold in raw, unfiltered light before sealing the bunker forever. The steel plate carries warmth, heat rising from the burning city above. A deeper, rolling collapse travels through the ground. The tremor shakes dust from beams, shifts small objects, and echoes in the hollow spaces beneath the floor. A single word slips from someone's lips, not fear, not surprise, but recognition, closer. The tremor fades into a heavy, anticipatory stillness. Above ground, the sky is falling in slow, destructive waves. Below, The bunker feels each movement as a muted memory, a softened echo of structures folding into themselves. Berlin is not simply falling, it is unmaking itself, one street at a time, one block at a time, one vibration at a time. And the bunker, once a stronghold of certainty, now feels the pressure of a world collapsing directly above its ceiling. Fractures in the circle. The corridor leading toward the inner offices carries a different weight than the rest of the bunker. The tension that fills this wing is sharper, more personal, not the diffuse unease of collapsing fronts, but the brittle pressure of people realizing their circle is cracking from within. The air here feels suspended, as though conversations have left imprints in it. A room to the left holds voices raised just slightly above a whisper. The tone sounds authoritative, but the edges are frayed. It is not anger. It is irritation, the kind born from shrinking confidence. Their words concern troop movements and supply routes, but the cadence betrays a deeper truth. None of these discussions can change what is happening above. Inside the doorway, officers stand around a map that no longer aligns with reality. One taps repeatedly on a district that has long since dissolved into rubble. Another avoids looking at the board altogether, staring instead at a dark stain on the opposite wall. Their bodies remain arranged in the posture of decision-making, but the purpose behind it has evaporated. When their voices fall silent, the quiet that follows feels heavier than the exchange itself. No one resumes work. No one leaves. They remain frozen in a small orbit of shared uncertainty, as if moving might break the fragile balance they're barely holding on to. Farther down the hall, another office holds two advisors sitting in front of an unopened report. The paper rests between them like an unwelcome truth. One lifts the cover, reads a line, and shuts it again almost immediately. The soft thump of the folder returning to the table echoes faintly in the tense room. His companion glances toward the doorway as if expecting someone to enter and relieve them of the responsibility they no longer want to carry. No one comes. The bunker absorbs their silence. As the corridor twists deeper into the wing, the lighting dims. The air grows warmer, almost stagnant. A faint drip echoes somewhere in the distance, a quiet reminder that even the infrastructure has begun to strain. At the end of the hallway, three staff members stand close together in quiet conversation. Their voices overlap softly, but the words repeat themselves. They revisit the same points again and again, circling uncertainty rather than challenging it. The conversation has no direction, not because they disagree, but because no path forward exists. When they notice movement in the corridor, their discussion withers into silence. The quiet they fall into is not secrecy. It is exhaustion. One rises from his chair and smooths the front of his uniform out of habit, though the motion lacks conviction. His shoulders sag slightly, revealing the fatigue beneath the fabric. The atmosphere presses close, making the space feel smaller with each step. This part of the bunker carries the weight of recognition unspoken. The city above is breaking open loudly, but here the collapse unfolds in quiet fractures, each person isolating into smaller and smaller pockets of thought. The bonds that once held the circle tight have loosened into thin, fragile threads. The corridor behind seems to exhale as the wing is left behind, and a different silence waits ahead, the kind that signals not tension, but the slow draining of sound itself. When certainty slips out of the room. The corridor beyond leads into a long, narrow office where stillness seems to have taken hold. Several people sit around a central table, but no one speaks. Their postures say more than their silence, bodies leaning forward slightly, as though caught in thoughts that refuse to settle. A pencil taps irregularly against a blank sheet of paper. The rhythm is uneven, betraying the internal struggle of the man holding it. The pencil never touches the page. Across from him, another officer stares at a report without really seeing it. His eyes slide over the same lines repeatedly, turning pages out of habit rather than comprehension. The steady tick of a wall clock underscores the room's disconnection from the world outside. Someone at the far end of the table shifts, takes a breath as if preparing to speak, then lets the breath fade out without forming words. He glances around, seeking reassurance or direction, but finds neither. Confidence can no longer be borrowed from the room. A clatter of pencils falling from a tray breaks the long silence. The sound is too loud for the space, echoing briefly before settling into the stillness again. A junior staff member kneels to gather them, his hands trembling slightly as he restores the row with careful precision. The act feels like someone trying to repair order using objects too small to matter. Near one corner, an officer rubs his temples, eyes closed, breathing slowly. His uniform remains sharply pressed, but his expression has softened into something hollow, a man running on the thin thread between duty and collapse. Nothing urgent pulls him forward. Nothing hopeful waits behind him. A whisper drifts across the table, a remark about reports from the northern districts. It garners a few nods, none of them meaningful. The sentence hangs in the air for a moment before dissolving. No follow-up comes. The bunker has reached the stage where even facts feel like repetitions. Beyond the doorway, the corridor stretches with muted lamps casting long shadows across the floor. A figure rests beneath one of the fixtures, slumped in a chair with a folder open across his lap. The pages inside remain untouched. His gaze stays fixed on some distant point, detached from the ticking clock above him. He breathes slowly, as though conserving effort. The deeper the wing becomes, the more the bunker seems to detach from time. Watches disagree. Clocks argue. People drift through tasks without beginnings or ends. Even silence feels stretched thin, pulled taut across rooms that once hummed with purpose. A final room narrows into a triangular point where a single chair sits beneath a hanging bulb. No one occupies it now, but the air carries the sense that someone left only moments ago. Someone who sat in that tight space, listening to the bunker's hollow quiet, letting it seep in until the edges of thought softened. What fills the corridor now is not tension and not panic. It is a quiet eroding of certainty, a dawning recognition settling inside each person like dust. Conversations fracture into gestures. Confidence thins into silence. The war's direction has slipped from their hands, and the bunker is beginning to absorb that truth. Ahead lies the moment where noise itself begins to evaporate, leaving only waiting, a hollow, unsettling quiet that deepens with every passing hour. The quiet machines. The corridor leading into the logistics wing carries a different kind of stillness, not human quiet, but mechanical. The air hums with a low, steady vibration, the signature of machines continuing their routines long after the tasks they were built for have lost meaning. Here, the bunker feels like a body whose heartbeat has slowed but not stopped, each pulse softer than the last. A narrow doorway on the left opens into a storage chamber where crates line the walls in precise, unbroken rows. Their labels, ammunition counts, radio parts, rations, once signaled movement and purpose. Now the ink looks faded, the handwriting belonging to a version of the world that no longer exists. Dust gathers at the base of each crate, collecting in soft drifts where foot traffic used to cut clear paths. In the center of the room, a technician kneels beside a generator panel, tightening a screw with slow, deliberate turns. The task is almost ceremonial. The generator hums steadily, its rhythm even, its condition stable. It doesn't need adjustment. Still, the technician continues, driven not by necessity but by the comfort of routine, the last ritual left in a world that has unraveled. When the screw stops turning, He rests his hand gently on the warm casing, as if offering reassurance not to the machine, but to himself. Farther inside, a small workshop holds shelves of tools arranged neatly along the wall. Wrenches, pliers, screwdrivers, all sized and ordered with precision. 4 days now, perhaps longer, no one has taken a tool from the rack. A thin line of dust rests across the handles, unbroken except for a single wrench someone returned earlier in the day. The mark of its absence leaves a clean outline, a faint reminder that maintenance once mattered. On one table lies a reel of cable, partially unspooled. The wire bends across the floor in a smooth arc, disappearing under a metal cabinet. It leads to nothing urgent, only a socket meant to reinforce a system that hasn't needed reinforcement for some time. The cable's presence feels more symbolic than functional, a last effort to hold things together. Near the back of the room, a small motor sits on a bench with its casing removed. The gears and coils inside rest untouched beneath a layer of dust. A cloth lies beside it, folded neatly, ready to be used for cleaning. But no one has lifted it today. Or yesterday. The motor has become a display of intentions that never found their way into actions. A steel door leads into the power room. The hinges give a soft sigh when pushed open, releasing a breath of warm, oil-scented air. Inside, the generator stands at the center like a slumbering animal, its outer casing vibrating gently with each rotation of its inner core. The light in the room is dim, cast by 2 bulbs overhead that flicker in slow, irregular patterns. A technician sits on a stool near the generator, elbows on knees, hands clasped loosely. He watches the machine with a distant calm, as though listening to its steady thrum for guidance. His eyes track the rhythm subconsciously, noting each shift in pitch, each fluctuation in tone. There is comfort in the consistency of the sound, the last steady heartbeat in a bunker filled with fading rhythms. He reaches over to a clipboard hanging from a hook, flipping through pages filled with precise notes. Fuel levels, output readings, timestamps. The entries stop abruptly several pages in, the pen stroke ending mid-digit. He lingers on the unfinished line, then lets the clipboard fall gently back against the wall. At the far end of the power room, a narrow hallway leads to a small alcove where spare parts lie arranged on shelves. Coils, gears, bolts, wiring bundles. Everything a bunker technician might need to keep the machines alive. The parts sit untouched, their usefulness irrelevant now that the end of the war presses close from above. A faint patina of dust settles over each item, dulling the faint metallic sheen that once marked them as vital. A vibration ripples through the floor, traveling up the walls in a slow, rolling wave. The tools on the shelves tremble softly, some clinking together with muted metallic taps. The technician lifts his head, listens for a moment, then looks back at the generator. The hum continues, steady and unbroken. The vibration fades. The bunker exhales. Returning to the corridor outside, the shift in atmosphere is immediate. The deeper rooms of the logistics wing hold not only silence, but the subtle echo of effort long abandoned. Machines still running, systems still alive, but the human purpose behind them slowly dissolving. As the corridor stretches toward the next section of the bunker, the hum of the generator grows distant, replaced by a softer quiet. The last whisper of mechanical life fades into the background, leaving only the weight of the air and the slow settling of dust. Ahead lies a wing shaped more by people than by machines, a place where fatigue takes form without injury, where the bunker's human heartbeat slows to match the mechanical one. The hours run thin. The corridor leading into the next section of the bunker feels dimmer, though the bulbs above glow with the same pale light. Time behaves strangely here. Without windows or daylight, the hours begin to bend and stretch, losing their familiar edges. Rows of bunks line one wall, each carved into shallow recesses. A few people lie on them, not asleep but drifting in the uneasy space between rest and waking. Boots remain on, uniforms creased, bodies held in positions that speak more of exhaustion than of comfort. One man stares at the ceiling, his eyes following an invisible pattern. Another breathes in uneven intervals, his chest rising sharply, falling slowly. A third taps a rhythm into the fabric beneath his fingers, a rhythm that does not match any of the ticking clocks nearby. The clocks continue their indifferent march. Some tick quickly, others lag behind. A few have stopped altogether. No one adjusts them. Time in this wing no longer corresponds to the world outside. The generators hum steadily, adding their own mechanical pulse to the slow, drifting atmosphere. A woman sits at a small desk, pencil poised over a sheet of paper. Her handwriting is neat, each letter shaped with care, but long pauses stretch between words. At one point she stops entirely, the pencil hovering motionless as her gaze drifts to the far corner of the room. When the line is finally finished, she sets the page aside as though completing it required the last of her strength. Farther inside, a man sits before a sprawling map he has pushed away from himself. His watch is lifted, read, and lowered with a sigh, a gesture not of impatience, but of disorientation. The war no longer provides any markers for the hours to adhere to. A kettle whistles faintly somewhere deeper in the wing, its sound quickly cut off. Silence folds back into the space. A battered calendar hangs from a nail on the wall. The date might not have changed in days. Or perhaps it has. Nothing in the bunker clearly distinguishes one day from another anymore. Footsteps shuffle along the hall. A staff member carrying a clipboard glances at the bunks, at the clocks, at the half-finished reports. His face is drawn, the deep fatigue of someone who has not known real sleep in weeks. He disappears around a corner, leaving only the soft echo of his steps behind. The bunker feels detached from the river of time, suspended in a shallow pool where minutes float and hours drift without direction. Tasks begin and stop without completion. Thoughts start and dissipate before forming conclusions. People rest because they can no longer stand, not because a schedule tells them to. The air grows still. The silence settles deeper. The hours thin until they feel almost transparent, fragile membranes stretched across a world slowly collapsing in on itself. Somewhere ahead lies another corridor, one where denial begins to unravel and the bunker meets the truth it has been holding at bay. When the day has no edges. The corridor narrows, and the light swings faintly from a loose cable overhead. The gentle arc of its motion sends a soft glow across the walls, tracing moving patterns across boots, papers, and the rough texture of concrete. In this part of the bunker, time feels even less anchored. Moments blend into one another. A young clerk works at a desk beneath the shifting light, stamping forms with weary precision. He signs his name, straightens the sheet, then pauses and repeats the same action without realizing it. After a long moment, he presses his hands against his closed eyes, gathering whatever clarity he can before continuing. Even small tasks have become difficult to complete. A kettle steams in a nearby chamber, two people warming their hands above it. The gesture seems less about comfort and more about anchoring themselves in something tangible. A quiet comment about the time drifts between them. Neither looks at their watch. None of the clocks agree anymore. The infirmary sits at the end of a short hallway. Its door stands partly open, revealing a medic slumped on a stool, eyes half closed, a thermometer loose in his hand. Behind him, a patient wrapped in a blanket breathes slowly, their chest rising in the steady rhythm of someone suspended between exhaustion and resignation. The medic glances toward the corridor with dull awareness before letting his gaze fall again. The deeper the wing becomes, the more the bunker resembles a place sealed inside a single, unbroken moment. A bank of clocks mounted on one wall ticks at conflicting speeds, some fast, some slow, one frozen entirely. What was once an attempt to track multiple time zones now feels like a display of time's collapse. Below the clocks sits a table cluttered with empty cups and half-written notes. Sentences trail off midword. Pens rest where they fell from tired hands. The dust on the surface is uneven, disturbed by restless movements. A distant boom shudders through the bunker, knocking loose a faint veil of dust from the beams above. No alarm follows. No one reacts with urgency. The collapse of the city has become background noise. The bunker does not respond with fear. It responds with stillness. A narrow junction at the end of the hall leads to a tiny triangular room, its walls converging at a sharp angle. A single bulb hangs above a solitary chair. No one sits in it now, but the air carries the sense that someone waited here moments before, listening to the bunker breathe, absorbing the hollow quiet as if trying to make sense of it. Everything in this wing moves slowly. Thoughts drift. Work falters. Time stretches thin enough to see through. The day no longer has edges. It folds softly around the people inside, pressing them further into suspension. Ahead lies another shift, a place where denial thins completely, and the final descent into quiet resignation begins. Denial in concrete rooms. The next wing of the bunker feels narrower, the ceiling lower, the air heavier. This is where conversations grow brittle. The tension here is not born of fear, but of resistance, the quiet, strained refusal to let reality take its full shape. The corridor carries the faint smell of ink and stale coffee, remnants of long hours spent clinging to routines that no longer serve a purpose. The first room along the hall holds officers gathered around a table. Their postures evoke confidence, though their hands betray the truth, tapping too sharply, gripping pencils too tightly, breaking objects not meant to break. Their voices sound crisp and certain as they point to arrows on a map, but the certainty dissolves upon closer listening. The lines they reference no longer match the world outside. Units they insist can be moved no longer exist in the strength the map implies. Still, the gestures continue. Ritual replaces strategy. One officer traces a series of defensive positions with his finger, pausing at a sector where no reinforcements will come. Rather than remove the marker, he lets his hand hover, then shifts to a different area as though the hesitation never occurred. No one comments. Every face in the room understands the truth too clearly to name it. In the next chamber, two advisors sit across from one another at a narrow table. Between them lies a stack of supply requests, ammunition, fuel, vehicles, radios. Each item is carefully written, categorized, annotated. None can be fulfilled. They know it. Still, one of them adds another line to the list, pressing the pencil tip into the paper with deliberate, almost reverent force. The other watches in silence, offering no correction and no encouragement. Denial survives best when shared. Farther down, raised voices drift from a doorway. Two officers stand close, speaking in tense, hard whispers. One argues for the repositioning of battalions. The other insists those battalions have already been cut off. Their debate loops in circles, returning to the same points. They are not discussing strategy. They are grieving the loss of control, searching for a version of events that allows one more hour of certainty. When their exchange quiets, the room falls into an uncomfortable stillness. The silence feels fragile, like a surface stretched too thin. No one wants to be the first to break it. A man sits alone in a smaller office at the end of the hall, a telephone resting on the desk before him. The line has gone silent, but he lifts the receiver anyway, holding it to his ear with practiced care. His expression reveals no expectation, only habit. When the empty silence on the line offers nothing back, he lowers the receiver gently, as though afraid to disturb the quiet. The gesture is not disappointment. It is resignation. The bunker absorbs him into its stillness. The walls vibrate faintly with distant impacts, but the sound barely registers. People in this wing move slowly and speak sparingly, caught in the final stages of resisting what the city above has already accepted. Here, denial is not a declaration. It is a posture. It is the refusal to let go of routines that once meant something. It is the invisible force that holds people upright even as the world tilts beneath them. Ahead lies the next shift, where denial thins and the first signs of reluctant understanding begin to settle into the air. When truth presses through the cracks. Deeper inside the wing, denial loses its grip. The air grows quieter, not because fewer people work here, but because certainty has drained from their movements. This is where the first signs of recognition settle softly into the rooms, carried in small gestures rather than words. A large map lies open on a table in the first chamber. Its borders and arrows remain intact, but no one touches them. Two officers stand on opposite sides of the table, hands resting flat on the surface, as though bracing themselves. Their eyes stay on the map, but no part of their posture suggests planning. The silence between them is telling, a shared acceptance, dawning slowly, that the lines before them carry no authority anymore. One lifts his gaze toward the ceiling when a distant explosion rolls through the ground. He counts the tremors silently, not to track artillery, but to occupy his thoughts. The other reaches for a marker, hesitates, then sets it down again without making a mark. His hand trembles faintly before coming to rest on the table. A few rooms away, a woman sits with a stack of reports. She flips through the pages mechanically, the motions slow and precise. At one page she stops, holding her thumb on the margin while her gaze drifts away from the text. After a short pause, she closes the file and places it face down beside her. She does not pick up another. The gesture carries the weight of someone who has just crossed the boundary between effort and inevitability. Farther along, a man sorts supplies in a cramped storage area. At first glance he appears focused, counting items and comparing them to a list. But as he moves, it becomes clear he is repeating counts already made, returning to the same items, recounting, rechecking. Not out of doubt, but because the structure of the task is all that remains to steady him. When he pauses, confusion flickers across his face, as though the purpose of the job has slipped from reach. At the far end of the corridor, a small triangular room holds a solitary figure hunched over a desk. A flickering candle casts a trembling pool of light, illuminating a blank sheet of paper. The man taps his pen lightly against the wood, the sound soft and uneven. Eventually he writes a single word, stares at it, and scratches it out. The page returns to emptiness. He covers the paper with his hand, shielding not a message, but the absence of one. The silence in the room deepens, shaped by everything left unsaid. The corridor outside draws these rooms together into a collective quiet. The bunker no longer holds denial intact. Truth has begun to seep in through the smallest cracks, through hesitation, through unfinished sentences, through the weight of hands resting motionless on tables. Acceptance arrives not with declarations, but with silence. Ahead lies a deeper shift still, where sound itself begins to thin, and the bunker drifts toward a silence shaped not by resistance, but by waiting. Weariness without wounds. The corridor bends gently and opens into a quieter wing of the bunker, where doors stand half-closed, curtains drawn halfway across narrow entrances. This is the medical section, built to handle wounds and emergencies that never arrived in the numbers once feared. The atmosphere here carries a different kind of heaviness, not the urgency of blood and bandages, but the slow weight of exhaustion that cannot be stitched or splintered. The first room holds a row of narrow cots, each lined with thin blankets. A few are occupied, but not by the gravely injured. Figures lie on their backs or curled onto their sides, uniforms loosened at the collar, boots placed neatly beneath the beds. Faces are pale, not from blood loss but from sleeplessness and strain. Eyes are closed, yet the muscles around them remain tense, as if even in rest they have not fully learned how to let go. A medic sits on a stool between two cots, an open chart resting on her lap. Her pen hovers just above the page, motionless. The entries on the sheet are simple: exhaustion, headache, insomnia, repeated over and over in cramped handwriting. The last line trails off where the ink thinned and stopped. She hasn't refilled the pen. She hasn't needed to. The symptoms no longer require recording. They are simply the air everyone breathes. At the far end of the room, a small cabinet stands ajar, shelves lined with bottles and bandages. Clean gauze rests beside unused sutures, rolls of tape, and neatly stacked cloths. More than once, someone prepared for casualties that never arrived, readying a space for the injured who were instead lost above ground, beyond the reach of these walls. The medic closes the chart quietly and sets it aside. Her shoulders slump forward as she leans her elbows onto her knees. For a long moment, she simply sits in the gentle hum of the bunker systems, listening to the slow, uneven breathing of the people on the cots. She doesn't move toward any of them. There are no emergencies here, only the slow erosion of strength. In the next room, a table holds equipment that looks untouched: a blood pressure cuff, a stethoscope, a tray with neatly arranged instruments. A single lamp illuminates the surface, casting a circle of light that feels too bright for the soft, subdued atmosphere. No one stands at the table. There are no procedures to perform, no triage to rush through, no urgent footsteps crossing the floor. A man sits on the edge of a cot against the wall, staring at his hands. His uniform jacket lies beside him, folded carefully. His sleeves are rolled to the elbow, exposing forearms mapped with faint impressions from long hours leaning on hard surfaces. A bandage wraps around his wrist, not from a wound, but from strain. The medic who wrapped it earlier did so with professional precision, though both knew it was not the wrist that needed attention. Opposite him, another figure lies sideways on a cot, one arm dangling over the edge, fingers grazing the floor. The slow, steady movement of breath lifts and lowers the back in a rhythm that seems to have synced with the bunker's distant vibrations. From time to time, the fingers twitch slightly, as though reaching for something seen only in dreams. Farther down the hall, a small washroom opens with a soft echo of footsteps on tile. A sink runs slowly, the tap not fully closed. The thin stream of water creates a constant, fragile sound, one of the few living notes in this part of the bunker. A medic stands nearby, hands resting on the edge of the sink, head bowed. The water reflects the dim overhead light, rippling faintly whenever the pipes complain with a metallic moan from somewhere deep in the walls. He looks up after a while, staring at his reflection in the mirror above the basin. The glass is slightly clouded, edges chipped, but his face appears clearly enough. Tired eyes, hollowed cheeks, a shadow of stubble that speaks of hours slipping by without routine. He lifts a hand as if to straighten his collar, then lets it fall again. Presentation no longer matters. There is no one here to reassure with a crisp uniform. In a smaller ward, a few chairs have been placed near the beds, their arrangement suggesting conversations that never fully formed. A blanket lies draped over one chair, its edge brushing the floor. Someone must have sat there through the night, watching over a sleeping figure who no longer needed watching. The chair remains where it was left, angled slightly toward the bed, the blanket holding the shape of a body long since gone back to its tasks, or to rest somewhere deeper in the bunker. Near the doorway, a chartboard hangs empty. Hooks meant to hold slates or tags now carry nothing. No names, no status markers, no list of injuries. The board has become a blank rectangle on the wall, a frame without content, marking not patience but absence. A distant vibration shudders through the floor, more felt than heard. An empty trolley beside the wall rattles softly, its wheels shivering in their tracks before settling again. No one rushes to check for damage. No one braces for incoming casualties. The people in these rooms have grown accustomed to impacts without follow-up. The medical wing stands ready for a kind of suffering that never fully arrived within its reach. Instead, it holds another kind, quiet, internal, and deeply human. Exhaustion that cannot be measured. Fear that does not bleed. Weariness that refuses to show itself as injury. Leaving the ward behind, the corridor feels heavier, as though the air itself has absorbed the slow, steady collapse of endurance. The bunker continues to hold everyone inside its concrete ribs, but the strength of the people within has worn thin in ways no bandage can secure. Ahead lies another part of the bunker where routine once offered comfort, where meals were served, benches were filled, and voices once rose in soft conversation before the quiet drowned them out. When the noise begins to drain. The next stretch of the bunker feels different, as if sound has begun to slip away from the air. Where earlier corridors carried the low murmur of activity, here the atmosphere is thinner, emptied of motion and intent. Even footsteps seem muted, absorbed by the concrete before they fully form. A communications room sits just ahead. Once vibrant with ringing telephones and overlapping voices, it now feels abandoned by urgency. The telephones rest in their cradles, wires draped loosely across the desks. A radio emits a soft, steady static that no one attempts to fix. Two operators sit in silence, one staring at a blank sheet of paper, pencil untouched, the other leaning close to a receiver as if hoping for a voice that will not arrive. In one corner, a typewriter holds a half-finished page. The last sentence ends mid-thought, the keys gathering a faint layer of dust. The room feels suspended, as though the air itself were holding onto the memory of movement without producing any. The corridor beyond is dim, the lamps casting long, tired shadows. Inside a small office off to the side, a man sits at a table with documents spread before him. His posture is composed, but his eyes stare past the papers, unfocused. The slow rise and fall of his shoulders suggest someone conserving energy for a task he no longer believes in. Farther along, a door stands ajar. Inside, a cup lies overturned on the floor beside a table, the spill long dried into a pale stain. No one has cleaned it. The stain feels like a remnant from an earlier rhythm, when movement still mattered. A weak bulb flickers overhead, its light trembling across the walls in uneven pulses. The supply closet nearby carries the faint smell of paper and cardboard. Shelves of neatly arranged items sit untouched. In another time, this room would have been busy with hands searching for supplies. Now it feels like a storage place for hours that no longer pass as they should. A soft click echoes down the hallway, the closing of a cabinet or perhaps a door settling back into place. The sound stands out in the emptiness, louder than it should be. Even small noises draw attention now. The deeper the corridor extends, the more the quiet thickens. Conversations no longer drift from open doorways. Tasks do not spill into the hall. The bunker's low mechanical hum becomes the dominant sound, a steady, artificial breath replacing the human one that once filled the space. Silence grows not as the absence of noise, but as a presence. It hangs in the corridor, gathering in corners, pressing lightly against the walls. The air feels hollow yet heavy, shaped by resignation rather than fear. Movement slows. Voices fall away. Even the smallest sounds carry a sense of intrusion. It becomes clear that the bunker is passing into a new stage. Noise does not fade all at once. It drains slowly, leaving behind a stillness that feels almost deliberate, as if the bunker itself understands that the outside world is closing in and has chosen to quiet itself in response. Ahead lies another stretch of halls, where waiting becomes the only action left. When voices fade into waiting. The air in the next corridor feels even thinner, as though sound has been filtered out before reaching it. Silence gathers here with purpose, settling into the spaces where work once lived. People move gently, carefully, as if unwilling to disturb whatever fragile balance remains. A room to the left holds 3 individuals seated around a table. They do not speak or look at one another. One studies his hands, fingers interlaced, the small movements of skin and bone becoming his entire focus. Another leans back against the wall, eyes closed but far from sleep. The third stares at a blank sheet of paper as though waiting for the faintest impulse to write something. None arrives. The quiet does not feel empty. It feels full, dense with thoughts unspoken. Their silence becomes its own form of communication. Farther down the hall, a telephone sits crookedly in its cradle. It looks as though someone set it down gently, perhaps during the last moment it rang. The line is dead now, the silence so complete that even lifting the receiver would feel like disturbing the room. A half-burned candle sits nearby, wax hardened down its side in layered ridges. The wick is dark, cold. Light has given up on this space. A clock mounted above the corridor ticks steadily, each second feeling unnaturally pronounced in the hush. The rhythm should be comforting, but instead it feels misplaced, a reminder that somewhere beyond these walls, time still behaves as expected. Beneath the clock, a man sits slumped in a chair, a folder open across his lap. The papers remain untouched. His gaze drifts across the room without focusing. He breathes slowly, conserving what little strength remains. The corridor narrows toward another room, a small triangular space marked by converging walls and a single hanging bulb. The light casts a faint cone over a solitary chair. The atmosphere suggests someone occupied it moments before, listening to the bunker's quiet, holding still against the weight of waiting. Now it stands empty, yet the room feels inhabited by whatever thoughts were left behind. As the corridor stretches on, a stillness settles into the space like a final exhale. The bunker feels distant from its earlier urgency, its earlier tension. Noise no longer asserts itself here. Voices fade to murmurs or disappear entirely. Footsteps soften until they barely register. Waiting becomes the dominant movement. Not active, not hopeful, but steady, a quiet acceptance of the narrowing world outside and the limited choices inside. The bunker breathes in long, muted intervals, shaped by the knowledge that events unfolding above will soon decide everything below. Ahead lies the next descent, deeper into resignation, deeper into the rooms where sound disappears completely and only the awareness of time's slow passing remains. Rituals without hunger. The corridor opens into a wider chamber where long tables stretch in neat rows beneath a low ceiling. This is the mess hall, or what remains of it. Once filled with the familiar sounds of clattering utensils, muted conversations, and hurried footsteps, it now echoes with a quiet that clings to every surface. The air carries a faint scent of stale bread and boiled potatoes, lingering remnants of meals that no longer offer comfort. The first table holds a few plates left behind, each with small remnants of food, a crust of bread, a smear of butter, a few grains of rice stuck to the edge. None appear freshly used. It is as if the diners pushed away their plates mid-meal, not out of urgency, but from the slow realization that hunger had drifted far from their bodies. A pot rests at the center of a serving counter, its lid slightly askew. Inside, a thin film has formed on the surface of the soup, cooling into a dull sheen. A ladle leans against the rim, handle angled outward as though awaiting a hand that never arrived. The pot still carries warmth, faint and fading, the last echo of a routine that once marked the passing of hours. Near the far wall, a stove glows softly beneath a large metal pot. The pot's contents simmer quietly, though no one stirs it, no one checks its temperature, no one watches the steam rise in gentle spirals. The room feels like a place trying to maintain life out of habit rather than necessity. Even the stove hums with a low, steady rhythm that sounds more like memory than function. A solitary figure sits at one of the tables, elbows on the wood, hands wrapped around a cup. The cup is empty. The figure lifts it occasionally, bringing it close to the lips before lowering it again, as if repeating a gesture learned so deeply that the absence of water inside barely registers. The person's gaze drifts across the room without settling on anything. They sit not to eat, but because sitting is easier than deciding where else to be. Beside the serving area, shelves hold neatly stacked bowls, plates, and cups. They shine faintly despite the dim light, their surfaces clean from days of minimal use. A cloth rests beside them, folded precisely, the edges aligned. Someone wiped and arranged these items carefully, but the act no longer matches a mealtime routine. It feels more like a ritual performed for order's sake, a quiet gesture toward maintaining a rhythm the bunker has long since outgrown. At the opposite end of the hall, a small sink drips in slow, rhythmic intervals. Each drop echoes as it lands in the empty basin, creating a soft, repetitive note that travels through the quiet. Next to it, a stack of drying racks holds utensils arranged in perfect symmetry, spoons on one side, forks on the other. The symmetry feels almost symbolic now, a final attempt to preserve structure in a space where structure has lost meaning. The floor bears scuff marks where chairs once scraped back in hurried motions. Now, the chairs remain neatly aligned, their legs perfectly parallel, pushed close to the tables. It looks as though the room was prepared for a gathering that never came. The silence sits heavily among the empty places. Someone enters the hall slowly, carrying a small metal tray. They set it down on the nearest table, the sound soft but noticeable in the quiet. Their movements are deliberate, not rushed. They approach the serving counter, lift the pot lid slightly, peer inside, then lower it gently without taking anything. The gesture suggests not disgust or discomfort, but indifference, a recognition that eating will change nothing about the hours pressing in from all sides. They choose a piece of bread instead, tearing it without looking down. The crumb falls onto the table, untouched. The bread itself remains in their hand for a long moment before they take a small bite, not out of hunger, but because bodies require movement when thoughts stand still. Behind them, a kettle sits on a warmer. Its contents have cooled, steam long gone. Condensation has formed a ring around its base, drying into a faint mineral trace. It sits angled slightly to one side, as though someone set it down with a tired hand and forgot to straighten it. At a corner table, another figure rests with their head on folded arms. The slow rise and fall of their shoulders marks the passage of time more reliably than the clocks scattered throughout the bunker. The rhythm of their breath blends into the broader quiet of the space, one more soft pulse among many. As a faint rumble filters through the walls, the utensils on the drying rack vibrate gently, their soft chattering rising for an instant before falling still again. No one reacts. The bunker has learned the language of collapse. It no longer startles at its voice. The mess hall holds the memory of what it once was, a place of routine, refuge, and small moments of human connection. But now the rituals have thinned. Eating happens without hunger. Conversation fades before it forms. Meals become markers of passing time rather than sources of strength. When someone finally rises from their seat and walks toward the exit, their footsteps echo softly across the floor. The empty tables and silent stove watch them go, the room settling once more into the quiet that now defines it. The corridor outside feels heavier after leaving the hall, as though stepping from the echo of humanity into a world that has slowed into stillness. Ahead lies another chamber where fragments of identity remain tucked inside small personal spaces, a quieter corner of the bunker holding remnants of the people who still live within it. The bunker holds its breath. The next corridor feels like stepping into a space that has forgotten movement. The air hangs still, untouched by drafts or footsteps. Even the faint hum of machinery seems quieter here, dampened by walls that feel thicker than before. It is as if the bunker itself has paused, caught in a moment stretched thin between fear and inevitability. A row of chairs lines the left side of the hallway. Most sit empty, but one holds a man leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, fingers laced tightly together. His gaze is fixed on the floor, following a crack that runs through the concrete. The crack isn't new, but he studies it as though its shape might offer clarity the maps could not. His breath settles into a slow rhythm, barely audible. Farther along, someone sits with their back against the wall, legs outstretched, eyes half open. They look awake and asleep at the same time, suspended in the quiet. When a faint vibration trembles through the floor, a distant collapse somewhere above, they blink once, then settle again into the same posture. No alarm follows. No words break the stillness. At the end of the hallway, a woman stands beside a dim light fixture, one hand resting on the cold metal casing. Her shoulders rise and fall in measured intervals. She seems to be waiting not for news, but for the silence itself to shift, for anything to signal that time is still moving in a meaningful way. A door opens softly nearby. A man steps out holding a cup of water. The liquid inside trembles slightly from the last reverberation and settles as he stands motionless in the doorway. He takes a small sip, then lowers the cup and stares into it as though expecting the surface to ripple again. When it doesn't, he turns back into the room without closing the door behind him. Across from the open doorway, a table holds a stack of folded blankets, untouched. Someone must have placed them there earlier in the day, or the previous day, in anticipation of exhaustion or necessity. Now they sit unmoved, their corners aligned too perfectly to match the disarray of the corridor. The atmosphere carries a quiet that is no longer simply absence. It is a waiting quiet, thick with things unspoken. Conversations that once flowed through these rooms have evaporated, leaving behind only the faint echo of words that were never finished. At intervals, faint sounds drift down from the city above. Distant crumbles, a hollow thud, the subtle groan of structures shifting under strain. The bunker absorbs each noise, softening it into a muted memory. What reaches the corridor is not sound, but suggestion. No one remarks on the tremors. No one speculates. The bunker has passed beyond the point where updates matter. The people inside sense more than they hear, understanding that the city is entering its final hours. What fills the corridor now is a collective inhale, held for too long, as though everyone is waiting for the moment when the breath cannot be held anymore. The deeper rooms ahead carry that held breath even further, the air dense with quiet anticipation. The quiet that settles before the fall. The corridor narrows into a low-ceilinged passage where even the lights seem subdued, casting only a faint, tired glow. The atmosphere grows heavier, shaped by a quiet that feels almost deliberate. It is not the absence of noise, but noise being slowly pushed aside by resignation. A small room opens to the right, holding a handful of people whose movements have grown deliberately slow. One person sits with their arms crossed on a table, head resting on folded sleeves, not asleep but drifting through thoughts too heavy to name. Another sits upright, staring at a lantern wick resting in an oil lamp that has long since cooled. Their gaze is steady, as though contemplating whether to light it or leave the darkness alone. A soft clink breaks the stillness as someone sets a metal spoon onto a dish. The sound echoes for a moment, carried farther down the corridor than expected. Eyes lift briefly, then fall again. The spoon becomes the only movement in the room for several long breaths. Further down, a man stands before a bulletin board where outdated notes hang untouched. His hand hovers over a piece of paper without removing it. After a moment, his arm lowers again. There is nothing new to post and nothing old worth discarding. The board marks a world that has stopped updating. A faint tremor rolls through the ground, not a violent shock, just a slow, spreading vibration that feels like the earth exhaling. Dust drifts from the beam overhead, settling in a thin line across the floor. No one reacts. The bunker has grown familiar with these murmurs, the quiet signatures of a city falling apart. At a junction of hallways, a small kettle sits atop a heating plate, unplugged. The last traces of steam dried long ago, leaving a thin mineral ring around the spout. Someone once intended to boil water here, but the moment passed quietly, its purpose forgotten. Beyond the junction, the narrow passage opens into a slightly larger space where a chair rests beneath a hanging light. The bulb hums faintly, glowing with an unsteady warmth. The chair is empty, but the shape of the room suggests it has been occupied, a place where someone waited, listened, and eventually left without leaving any trace but the impression of presence. Here, silence gathers in deeper layers. People move as if underwater, their thoughts opaque, their gestures softened. Waiting becomes the dominant atmosphere. Not patient waiting, not hopeful waiting, just waiting, shaped by the understanding that the war outside is drawing its final breath, and the bunker is holding on to the last moments before collapse. The corridor ahead leads toward an even quieter part of the complex, where voices disappear entirely and only the weight of time remains. The weight beneath the silence. The next corridor feels colder, though the air itself hasn't changed. Something else has shifted, a subtle pressure settling over the bunker, thinning the atmosphere until each breath feels slightly heavier. The silence that filled the earlier rooms has evolved. It no longer feels like waiting. It feels like something approaching. A figure stands near a doorway, arms folded tightly across the chest, posture rigid, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. The stance carries tension, not movement, a kind of inward bracing. When a faint tremor rolls through the floor, the figure's shoulders tighten, then slowly release as the vibration fades. The reaction is small, but unmistakable, instinct recognizing danger before thought does. A few steps farther, an officer sits at a desk with a lamp casting a narrow ring of yellow light over a collection of reports. Most of the pages lie untouched. One rests beneath his hand, crumpled slightly at the edges where his fingers grip it. He stares at the paper without reading, as if the act of holding it postpones a truth he isn't ready to face. His other hand taps lightly against the wood, not a rhythm, but a pulse. A chair creaks softly in the corner of the room where another person leans forward, elbows on knees. Their eyes are closed, lips pressed tightly together, not asleep, not resting, simply holding themselves still, as though movement might disturb whatever fragile equilibrium remains. From deeper in the bunker, the rumble of collapsing structures filters through the walls, softened but no longer distant. The sound is closer now, resonant enough to leave a faint vibration traveling along the floor. Dust drifts in thin lines from the edges of overhead beams. Someone glances up, then away, unwilling to assign meaning to the falling particles. A hallway junction holds a table with an oil lamp resting beside a stack of folded towels. The towels are untouched, their corners aligned with almost ceremonial precision. The lamp's glass chimney carries a faint smudge from a handprint left hours ago, or days. Time has blurred into something thicker, more viscous, refusing to separate into distinct moments. A kettle placed on a heating plate emits a hollow, empty ring when a hand brushes against it. It hasn't been used recently. It may never be used again. The metallic sound lingers longer than expected, traveling through the quiet before dissolving into the corridor's soft gloom. Someone passes through the hallway carrying a bundle of documents, moving with a slow, measured gait. The papers tremble faintly in their hands. They walk past without speaking, without acknowledging anyone. The silence is not deliberate. It has simply become the default language of the bunker. Every room along this stretch feels touched by a thin layer of dread, not spoken, not shared, but present in the air. A sense that the walls are absorbing the weight of events above, storing it in their concrete veins. The war is no longer something happening outside. It is beginning to press inward, shaping the bunker's atmosphere in ways too subtle to quantify. Ahead lies another corridor where this pressure grows heavier, the rooms holding a quiet thickened by fear that has begun to take a definite shape. When fear learns the shape of the walls. The next passage narrows, forcing the light into tighter angles that stretch long shadows along the floor. The air feels dense, carrying a faint metallic scent, as though the walls themselves have begun to exhale the tension stored inside them. The silence now has an edge. It cuts more sharply. A small office to the right holds two people sitting at opposite sides of a table. Neither speaks. One has a hand curled under their chin, fingers pressed against the jaw, eyes drifting across the table's surface. The other sits almost perfectly still, hands clasped, staring at a lamp that flickers intermittently. With each flicker, the person's breath catches slightly, as though waiting for the light to fail entirely. In the hallway, a pair of boots rests beside a chair. No one sits in the chair. The boots are aligned neatly, placed with care. Their emptiness turns them into symbols, quiet reminders that some duties have ended before the people assigned to them could complete their roles. The sense of absence clings to them like dust. Farther in, a man stands at a small wash basin, hands braced against the metal rim. Water sits still inside, reflecting the dim overhead light. He doesn't wash his face or drink. He simply holds the basin as though steadying himself against a wave of thoughts. When a distant thud vibrates through the floor, the water shivers, creating a brief ripple that distorts the reflection. He watches the ripple fade with a kind of resigned fascination. A lantern mounted on a wall flickers in the draft of an unseen vent. The flame dances erratically, casting shifting shadows that make the room pulse with motion it does not possess. Someone sits beneath the lantern, watching the flame as though waiting for it to reveal something. The longer they stare, the more their shoulders slump. The corridor grows quieter as it deepens. A faint smell of dust and settling debris lingers in the air. A few items lie scattered across a table: a folded map, a broken pencil, a tin cup with a dent along its side. These objects feel orphaned, left behind by hands that no longer have the energy to tidy them away. Near the end of the hall, a woman stands beside a narrow window slit covered by a steel plate. Her fingertips rest lightly on the cold metal. She remains motionless, listening, not for voices, not for orders, but for the rhythm of destruction above, the distant collapses, the shifting echoes of a city unraveling. Her breath steadies into slow, controlled exhales. She inhales deeply once, then lets it out in a quiet release that feels like surrender. The moment carries the weight of realization. The bunker is no longer holding the war at bay. It is being surrounded by it. Fear spreads here not through noise, but through its absence, a quiet so complete that even the smallest vibration becomes a message, a kind of countdown, unspoken but understood. Ahead lies a wing of the bunker where the quiet grows absolute, where dread crystallizes into certainty, and the final hours begin to take shape with unmistakable clarity. The last attempts at reaching out. The corridor turns sharply and descends by a few steps into a narrower passage lined with thick cables secured by metal brackets. The sound here carries a faint electrical hum, soft, uneven, almost hesitant. This wing once connected the bunker to the world outside, its wires carrying orders, reports, and desperate calls for clarity. Now it feels like a hollow chamber where silence arrives before messages do. The first room opens into a communications office with long tables running parallel to one another. Headsets rest neatly on their hooks, their ear pads slightly misshapen from long hours of use. A lamp on the desk casts a small circle of dim yellow light, illuminating a notebook filled with half-finished logs. The final entry notes a call that cut off mid-sentence. Nothing follows. A radio operator sits motionless in a chair near the center of the room, headphones draped loosely around his neck. His hands rest on his thighs, palms facing upward as though he set them there intentionally to keep them still. The radio before him emits a low static hum, the kind that once promised a voice waiting beyond the noise. He watches the indicator needle twitch occasionally, as though waiting for it to move with purpose. It never does. Another operator stands by the wall where a bank of receivers flickers softly with inconsistent green lights. She adjusts one dial, then another, then pauses with her hand hovering over a third. Each movement is slow and methodical, not out of precision, but out of habit. Her eyes carry no expectation. She turns a final knob, leans in, listens to the soft hiss of static, and steps back. Against the far wall, a row of switches remains in their active position despite the absence of traffic. A clipboard hangs beside them, holding pages once filled with frequencies and call signs. Most of the entries are crossed out, replaced by newer ones, then crossed out again. The ink grows thinner with each revision, as though the pen itself grew tired of leaving marks. A faint pop shivers through the static on one of the radios. All heads turn slightly, a trained reflex, but no one moves closer. The pop fades into silence. A few seconds later, a soft, ghostly murmur breaks through, a fragment of a voice, too faint to identify, rising briefly and vanishing in the same breath. The operators exchange glances without speaking. They have heard this kind of fragment before. It is not communication. It is the dying echo of a collapsing network. In the corner, a typewriter sits with a sheet of paper rolled halfway into its carriage. 3 lines are typed neatly. The 4th line ends after 2 words, the last letter struck too lightly to form a full impression. Dust settles on the metal keys, softening their shapes. A spool of ribbon sits beside it, unused. A steel door with reinforced hinges marks the entrance to the communications vault itself, the most insulated room in the wing. The door stands half open, revealing a chamber filled with consoles, dials, switches, and bundled cables arranged with military precision. The equipment here is slightly older, built for durability rather than convenience. Inside, a single operator sits with his back straight, headset pressed firmly over his ears. His eyes are closed, his brow relaxed. His fingers rest on the knobs of the console, barely touching them. From his posture, it is unclear whether he is listening intently or simply resting. The faint flickering of indicator lights reflects on his face in soft pulses, green, then dim, then green again. On the shelf beside him rests a small notebook filled with tight, concise handwriting. The early pages contain detailed logs, timestamps, frequencies, and brief summaries of transmissions. As the pages progress, the entries grow shorter. A few pages near the end hold only a single word each: static, nothing, empty. The final page is blank. A drawer beneath the console remains open, revealing neatly coiled wires, replacement connectors, and tools organized with care. None have been disturbed recently. Their order is pristine, untouched by urgency. At the center of the vault, a large receiver emits a deeper, more resonant static than the smaller radios outside. It feels almost alive, its low vibrations pulsing faintly through the floor. Occasionally, a distant rumble from above filters into the chamber as a dull, uneven thud. The two sounds, static and tremor, weave together into a rhythm that feels like a conversation between earth and machine. A few moments later, a sudden burst of noise interrupts the static. Louder, more jagged, a ripple of interference that rises and falls in a broken arc. The operator at the main console opens his eyes, not startled, but gently attentive. He adjusts a dial with careful precision. The noise thins into a barely audible crackle. Then nothing. He returns his hands to stillness. A small speaker on the wall emits a slow, rhythmic pulse, a test signal that continues out of duty rather than necessity. Its steady beep once signaled readiness. Now it sounds more like a heartbeat echoing in an empty room. An overhead bulb flickers once, then steadies. Its light reveals a map pinned to the far wall, marked with colored pins indicating communication hubs, relay stations, and listening posts. Many pins have fallen out. The lines connecting them sag where the map buckles inward. The world it describes no longer exists. As the operators resume their quiet vigilance, the vault fills with a subtle tension of effort stretched beyond meaning. Voices no longer travel through these wires. Messages no longer cross the static. What remains is the gesture, hands on dials, ears to the silence, eyes scanning faint heartbeats of light. The bunker's connection to the outside world has thinned to a whisper. Soon even the whisper will vanish. Leaving the vault, the corridor feels heavier, filled not with the weight of dread, but with the realization that no more calls will be answered. Ahead lies a wing where those remaining attempt to hold on to hope itself, their quiet endurance softened by blankets, dim lamps, and the fragile calm of civilians hiding from the final hours. The soft collapse of hope. The air cools as the corridor transitions into the civilian wing, a quieter, dimmer part of the bunker set apart from the military rooms. The sounds here are softer, muted by blankets, lowered voices, and the slow exhale of people who have spent too long beneath the earth. This wing carries a different kind of weight, not strategic, not operational, but human. The first room opens into a wide chamber where several civilians sit on benches arranged along the walls. A dim lamp hangs low above them, its light casting a faint amber circle across the floor. Most of the figures sit wrapped in blankets, their shoulders hunched forward as though trying to make themselves smaller within the cold air. A few hold bags or bundles on their laps, not filled with valuables, but with things small enough to carry when leaving home meant taking almost nothing. A woman near the door clutches a worn handbag pressed against her chest. The leather has cracked along its seams, the clasp loose from years of use. She doesn't open it. Her fingers rest along its edges as though memorizing its shape. Her gaze drifts across the room without focusing. The bag may hold nothing essential, but it anchors her to whatever life existed before these walls. Across from her, an older man sits with a blanket pulled around his shoulders, knuckles visible where he grips the fabric. His breathing is slow, each inhale steady, each exhale thin. He stares at a small radio placed on the table beside him. The antenna bent, the dial turned to a frequency no longer carrying sound. The man doesn't reach for it. The silence from the radio has become familiar, almost comforting in its predictability. In the corner, a small cluster of families rests on the floor, seated close but not speaking. The dim light softens their outlines into a single, gentle silhouette. A child leans against an adult's shoulder, wrapped tightly in a blanket far too large for them. The fabric covers their face almost completely, reducing them to a quiet shape folded into the comfort of someone's arms. The adult strokes the blanket absent-mindedly, not with urgency but with the slow rhythm of someone offering reassurance where little reassurance remains. A few steps deeper into the wing, a narrow hallway leads to a series of smaller rooms. In one, a woman sits alone on a low stool, hands clasped tightly in her lap. A shawl drapes around her, its fibers frayed, the edges worn. She stares at a lantern resting on the floor, watching the flame flutter unevenly as a draft slips under the door. Her eyes do not follow anything else in the room. The flame seems to provide just enough movement to hold her attention, just enough light to keep the darkness softened. Behind her, a mat lies on the floor with a few items arranged along its edge. A small comb, a folded handkerchief, a pair of socks carefully rolled. The items feel less like luggage and more like remnants, everyday belongings preserved simply because discarding them would mean acknowledging a kind of ending no one is ready to accept. In another room, a man sits with his back against the wall, elbows resting loosely on his knees. His breath rises in slow, controlled intervals. A pair of shoes sits beside him, perfectly aligned, polished once but dulled by dust. He closes his eyes each time a faint tremor filters through the ground, remaining still until the vibration fades. His posture holds not fear, but resignation, a quiet endurance shaped by long hours spent listening to the muffled collapse above. Farther along, a family occupies a corner of a dim chamber. Two adults sit close, knees nearly touching, blankets wrapped around their shoulders. A child rests asleep between them, head tucked beneath an arm, hair barely visible beneath the folds of cloth. One adult adjusts the blanket slightly, careful not to wake the child. Their movements are slow, intentional, shaped less by urgency than by the instinct to remain gentle even when strength is worn thin. A kettle sits on a heating plate near the room's center, its sides still faintly warm. Someone must have boiled water earlier, perhaps for tea or for the comfort of holding a warm cup. Now the kettle stands silent, collecting condensation along its rim. A single enamel mug sits beside it, handle pointed outward, as though waiting for someone to return. A low cough breaks the quiet from time to time, soft, tired, nothing alarming. The sound echoes gently in the confined space, then fades. No one reacts with concern. It is simply another small human sound woven into the bunker's fabric. A hallway off to the side leads to a narrower room where several civilians sit shoulder to shoulder on a bench. Their expressions are blank but not empty, the look of people who have long since exhausted fear and now inhabit the sparse space left behind. Someone rubs their hands together slowly, more from restlessness than from cold. Another taps a faint rhythm on their knee, a quiet attempt to anchor themselves in a moment that feels unsteady. The final room in this wing holds little but mattresses arranged in rows along the floor. Most remain empty, their blankets folded back neatly, corners squared. A few are occupied by those sleeping or pretending to sleep. Breath rises in gentle patterns, the kind that signals exhaustion more than rest. As the corridor leads out of the civilian wing, the air grows heavier again. The quiet behind these doors feels different from the military stillness elsewhere, softer, more fragile. It is the quiet of people waiting not for orders, but for time to move, waiting for news that will not come, waiting for an ending they do not choose. Ahead lies another part of the bunker where objects outlast purpose, the deep storage rooms holding the forgotten memory of a city running out of time. The realization that cannot be avoided. The corridor ahead carries a different quiet, not the brittle hush of denial, nor the tense stillness of dread, but something deeper. A calm that feels too heavy to be comforting. It settles over the space like a low fog, soft but unavoidable, pressing gently against every surface. A room to the left holds several officers seated around a wide table. There are no maps on the surface now, no lists, no scattered reports. Everything has been cleared away except for a single oil lamp whose flame wavers slightly with each faint tremor from the city above. The officers sit upright, hands folded or resting loosely in their laps. No one speaks. No one pretends to be reviewing anything. They are simply present, held in suspension. One of them glances toward the lamp from time to time, watching the flame bend, then straighten. The flicker seems to mirror the fragile rhythms of the bunker, wavering under the pressure above, then finding its shape again in the stillness. In the far corner, a man sits against the wall with his legs drawn up, arms wrapped loosely around them. His eyes remain open, but his thoughts seem distant, drifting somewhere beyond the concrete walls. He doesn't move even when a soft vibration ripples through the floor. His breath rises and falls steadily, the calm of someone who has stopped bracing and begun accepting. Another room farther down holds a single figure leaning over a desk. The lamp casts a soft glow over his hands, which rest flat against a blank sheet of paper. He has not written anything. He has not tried. There is no need to record what everyone already knows. Instead, he lets his shoulders relax, body folding gently into the quiet. The paper remains untouched, waiting for a message that will never arrive. The corridor continues its slow descent. A radio in one room sits silent except for a faint, rhythmic click in its wiring, a mechanical heartbeat left behind by equipment still running through its motions. A pair of headphones lies beside it, their padded cups slightly flattened from long use. No one has worn them in hours. Maybe longer. A kettle sits near the end of the hall, placed carefully on a heating plate that has been unplugged. A thin ring of residue remains on the rim, the last sign of water that once steamed away. The kettle feels like a relic of an earlier hour, a simpler moment in a day that has grown too heavy to measure. The bunker breathes slowly, its concrete walls absorbing each tremor from above. The air carries a faint mix of dust and metal, a quiet reminder of the world collapsing overhead. No one reacts to the sounds anymore. They have become a background pulse, steady and predictable in their devastation. What fills the corridor now is not fear, not tension, but clarity, a resigned understanding settling into the rooms, into the bodies, into the breath of every person left inside the bunker. The war above is ending, and the conclusion is drawing closer than anyone dares to say aloud. Ahead lies another chamber where this realization takes full shape, quiet yet unmistakable, settling into the very walls, when acceptance spreads through stone. The next wing opens into a larger room where several people sit with their backs against the walls. Their spacing is wide, leaving the center of the room empty. It creates an atmosphere of solemn distance, as if everyone instinctively recognizes the significance of this hour but cannot bring themselves to disturb its stillness. A lamp rests on a small table near the far wall, its flame shivering within the glass. The shadows it casts are long and softened at the edges. They sway slightly with each tremor from above, creating a slow dance of shifting outlines on the concrete. The room feels timeless, caught in the thin space between awareness and surrender. In one corner, an officer sits perfectly still, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. At intervals, he closes his eyes, not to rest, but to steady his thoughts. When he opens them again, the clarity in his expression reveals a truth already accepted. The war above is nearing its last breaths, and its final exhale will reach this bunker soon enough. Across from him, another person sits with a blanket draped around their shoulders. The fabric shifts each time they breathe. They look toward the floor with an expression so calm it borders on empty, as though all emotions have been distilled down to a single quiet resolve. The rise and fall of the blanket becomes the only motion in the room. A man near the center of the wall traces a finger along the seam where concrete panels meet. His gesture is slow and deliberate. It carries no urgency. It feels instead like an attempt to anchor himself, a tactile reminder that something still holds firm even as everything above collapses. When a faint rumble passes through the bunker, he pauses, waits, then continues tracing the seam. On a nearby table, a folded uniform jacket rests atop a stack of documents. The papers beneath it remain undisturbed, untouched since the last time someone believed they could influence events outside. The jacket's fabric holds a sharp crease along the shoulder where it sat beneath the weight. It has become symbolic, representing a duty interrupted by circumstances far beyond these walls. At the edge of the room, a woman stands with one hand pressed against a support beam. Her eyes remain half-closed, her breathing slow. She seems to be listening to something the others do not hear, or perhaps something only she has the strength to acknowledge. Her posture is steady, but the quiet around her hums with a sense that this moment contains a truth everyone feels but no one names. A low tremor rumbles through the concrete, softer than earlier strikes, but more resonant. It lingers in the air a moment longer than the rest. Dust drifts down from the corners of the ceiling. The lamp flame bends, straightens, then bends again. No one startles. No one speaks. Acceptance fills the room like a slow-rising tide. Gentle, inexorable, complete. The bunker is no longer resisting. The people inside are no longer pretending. The city above is finishing its collapse. And the final hours are coming into view. Ahead lies the last chamber before the transition into the aftermath, a space where silence becomes the only remaining truth and the fall of Berlin presses fully into the walls of the bunker. The bunker's forgotten memory. The air cools noticeably as the corridor slopes downward into the deepest part of the bunker. The lamps grow fewer, their light stretched thin along the walls. Here, the silence feels older, like something that settled long before the final days began. This is the storage level, the bunker's memory, hidden beneath layers of concrete and time. A heavy door opens into the first of the storage rooms. The hinges release a low groan, the sound rolling gently across rows of stacked crates. Wooden boxes reach almost to the ceiling, arranged in tall, narrow aisles. Each crate bears a label. Numbers, locations, dates. Names of units that no longer exist, cities whose streets are now broken, rail lines severed by craters. The handwriting on the labels has begun to fade, the ink softening along its edges. Dust coats the tops of the crates in a uniform layer, disrupted only by a few faint handprints and the narrow tracks of something dragged across the surface weeks ago, or months. The air smells of wood, paper, and the faint metallic tang of old nails and locks. It is not unpleasant. It is the smell of things waiting. A narrow aisle leads between two towering stacks. The floor bears overlapping scuff marks where boots once passed regularly. Now, the marks stand unrefreshed, the dust settled thick between them. A crate near the end of the aisle sits slightly askew, its lid pried open. Inside lie neatly packed gas masks, still wrapped in thin paper. They look untouched, their straps folded in perfect loops. They were prepared for emergencies that never quite arrived down here. Farther in, Another room opens, this one longer, its shelves made of steel instead of wood. Rows of canned goods stretch into the dim light. Emergency rations stacked 3 deep, labels stiff and unwrinkled. Some cans are marked with dates long past. The food inside might still be edible. It might not. No one checks. The bunker has reached a point where the future implied by these reserves no longer feels realistic. A single tin sits out of place on a lower shelf, separated from its row. A faint ring of dust outlines where it once rested. Someone picked it up, turned it in their hands, read the small print, and then set it back down in the wrong spot. The gesture feels oddly human amid the rigid order, a quiet sign that even in this place, routine broke enough for a moment of absent-mindedness. The next chamber holds equipment wrapped in canvas, radio spares, cables, field kits, coils of rope, folded tops. Tags pinned to each bundle list inventory numbers and destinations. Many of the destinations are places now under ruins or in enemy hands. The tags flutter slightly when a faint draft moves through the room, as if the past is breathing softly. A crate near the doorway stands open, its packing straw spilling onto the floor. Inside rest stacks of printed posters, edges curled, colors muted by age. The designs are simple: slogans, symbols, instructions for air raid procedures, directives for blackouts. They were meant for streets and walls, for stairwells and factory corridors. They never left the crate. Their warnings arrive too late now, trapped in the dark with everything else. At the far end of the storage level, a narrower room extends into a low, vaulted chamber. The ceiling dips close to the top shelves, where paper files sit thick and compressed in uniform folders. Reports, directives, correspondence, an entire paper trail of decisions and assumptions. Many of the folders are labeled with care. Some titles are underlined. A few bear small marks in pencil, reminders that someone once meant to return to them. A file rests open on a table near the entrance. Pages inside are fanned slightly, edges crinkled. The last page has been folded back, the top corner creased where a thumb pressed too long. The text ends with a plan written in confident language. No follow-up exists. The plan belongs to a world that assumed it still had time. A single light bulb hangs from the ceiling in the middle of the room. Its weak glow reveals spiderwebs glistening along one upper corner, threads strung quietly between a pipe and a beam. The webs hold no insects, only dust. Even the smallest creatures seem to have abandoned the lower levels. In one corner, a set of wooden crates bears stenciled markings identifying their contents as emergency medical supplies. The lids remain sealed. A faint white chalk mark across one top crate, a simple X, suggests someone once intended to open it. The intention never carried through. The wood beneath the chalk has grown pale and dry. A metal locker stands to the side, its door slightly ajar. Inside hang several respirators and protective capes, the fabric stiff with age and storage. A clipboard attached to the inside of the door lists issuance records from months earlier. The last entry trails off halfway through a name. The pen stroke stops abruptly, leaving an unfinished arc. A low, distant vibration passes through the floor, traveling into the shelves and crates. A few small items rattle, shifting slightly where they rest. One folder slides a fraction of an inch closer to the edge of its shelf, then settles again. The sound of the rumble is muffled, almost gentle at this depth. It feels more like a reminder than a threat. The storage rooms hold everything the bunker thought it might need to survive longer than it will. Food for weeks. Equipment for repairs. Supplies for contingencies that never unfolded in the expected way. The deeper the shelves extend, the more they resemble an archive of unrealized futures, possibilities boxed and stacked, outlasting the decisions that justified them. As the corridor leads back up from the storage level, the air warms by degrees. The hum of the generator becomes faintly audible again, joined by the soft echoes of human presence. A cough, a footstep, a chair shifting. The memory held below remains undisturbed. Rows of crates and shelves standing quietly in the dark, witness to plans designed for a war that refused to follow them. The bunker returns to its slow, heavy breathing, its rooms filled with people waiting, thinking, or simply sitting in the presence of silence. Above, the city continues its final descent into ruin. Below, the concrete holds its shape a little longer. Soon, even this stillness will pass into memory. But for a brief stretch of hours, the bunker remains, a hollow space filled with maps and beds and machines and shelves, all bearing witness in their own quiet way to the last days beneath Berlin. The last movements of a dying day. The corridor leading into the deepest part of the bunker feels almost untouched by human presence. The air is cooler here, the surfaces more bare, the lights dimmer. Everything in this wing carries a sense of finality, as if every object has settled into the position it will hold until the end. A narrow doorway on the right opens into a room where 3 people sit spaced widely apart. Each holds a posture shaped not by fatigue but by acceptance. A man in the corner sits with his back straight, hands folded on his lap, eyes tracing the faint patterns in the concrete floor. He seems neither alert nor tired, only present in a way that suggests he has stopped expecting anything to change. Across the room, a woman rests her elbows on her knees, fingers interlaced beneath her chin. She stares at a lantern placed on a small box in front of her. The weak, wavering flame reflects faintly in her eyes. She doesn't blink often. Each shift of the flame seems to contain its own quiet message. A third person leans against the far wall with their head tilted back, the outline of their breath visible only in the slow movement of their chest. They close their eyes whenever a tremor passes through the bunker. When the vibration fades, they do not open them immediately. The stillness seems easier to hold than the sight of the room. A soft metallic clink sounds when someone adjusts their posture. The noise echoes slightly in the near-empty space before dissolving again. Even small sounds feel amplified this deep underground. Nothing is loud, but everything feels significant. Farther down the corridor, a small alcove holds a table with a few personal items laid atop it. A fountain pen, a folded note, a pair of gloves, a half-finished cup of water. These objects rest untouched, remnants of tasks abandoned quietly, their final status neither confirmed nor questioned. An officer stands in the next room with a hand pressed against a map pinned to the wall, not studying it, not adjusting anything, simply touching the paper. His eyes rest on a sector long lost to the fighting above, yet he does not move his hand away. The map feels less like a tool now, and more like a reminder of a world that was still navigable once. A low rumble rolls through the bunker, not explosive, but structural. A deep settling of stone and steel somewhere above. The sound vibrates through the floor in a long, slow wave, carrying with it the unmistakable sense that the city is reaching its final threshold. Dust drifts from the ceiling and settles across the empty chairs lining the hall. No one startles. No one comments. The tremors have become as predictable as breathing. At the end of the corridor, a narrow door leads into a room that feels like the bunker's quietest space yet. The walls here seem to absorb even the faintest sound. A single lamp glows weakly from a bedside table, illuminating a few scattered items. A coat, a cup, a notebook left open with no words on the page. The atmosphere carries a heavy calm, as though the bunker itself has exhaled its last active breath. The energy that once circulated through its rooms has drained away, leaving only the quiet pulse of the generator and the muffled collapse of the world above. Everything here feels like the final movement of a day that will not return. Ahead lies the last doorway, a place where silence is complete, and the bunker meets the full weight of the ending. When the stillness becomes the only truth. The final chamber of the bunker feels untouched by time, untouched by sound, untouched by anything but the slow gravity of inevitability. The air is cool and dry, and every object sits exactly where it was left, as if the room itself has chosen not to be disturbed. A few chairs line the walls, each carrying signs of long use: worn fabric, flattened cushions, faint impressions where bodies once rested for too many hours. Now they stand empty, waiting for occupants who may not return. A small table at the center holds a lantern whose flame has begun to shrink, its fuel nearly gone. The light glows faintly, casting soft shadows that drift with the flame's unsteady pulse. The room seems to breathe with it, expanding and contracting in the quiet rhythm of dying illumination. On a narrow bed, pushed against the wall, lies a neatly folded blanket. Someone took time to arrange it despite the collapsing world outside, smoothing the corners with a care that feels almost ceremonial. The fold lines remain sharp. No one has touched it since. A glass of water rests on the floor beside the bed, the surface perfectly still. The clarity of it stands out against the dimness of the room. It feels like the last untouched thing in a place otherwise worn by tension and time. In the far corner, a man sits with his back to the wall, legs stretched out, hands resting loosely on his thighs. His eyes are half closed, his breathing slow. He looks at peace, but not from comfort, from surrender, the kind that comes when there is nothing left to do but wait. The faint sound of the collapsing city filters through the thick concrete, not rumbling now, but a long, low groan, like a building settling into the earth. The noise is soft, but its meaning is unmistakable. Berlin is finishing what it began. Dust swirls gently in the air with each tremor. The lamp flame dips, steadies, dips again. The room holds every small detail with equal weight: the fold of the blanket, the quiet breath of the man in the corner, the cooling metal of the lantern. Nothing moves quickly here. Nothing interrupts the stillness. The world outside has narrowed to a single point, and the bunker exists in the quiet just before that point closes. A long moment passes, unbroken by speech or motion, a moment that feels as though it might stretch into eternity, but will not. The stillness is not peaceful. It is final. The final doorway ahead leads out of the narrative of the bunker and into the aftermath, the last reflection, the final descent, the soft echo after the end. Aftermath, the sound that follows silence. When the final hours of a city fall into place, the world does not end with thunder. It ends with a kind of settling, a long exhale that carries the last breath of everything that once stood above ground. Down here, beneath layers of stone and soil, the silence becomes something almost physical. It spreads through corridors, rests on empty bunks, lingers on the rims of cold cups, and presses gently into the walls as if trying to leave an imprint. The last tremors fade, not all at once, but gradually, like waves losing strength before reaching the shore. Floors stop quivering, lamps stop flickering, dust stops drifting from corners. What remains is a stillness unlike the others, not the waiting stillness, not the fearful stillness, but a final quiet that settles when nothing is left to shift. In this space, time becomes a soft, indistinct fabric. Minutes stretch, blur, and lose shape. What mattered hours ago feels distant, softened by the weight of what has been accepted. Every room holds its own small story: a jacket folded carefully on a chair, a pencil left where it rolled, a page half filled and then abandoned. These objects look unchanged, but they carry a new meaning now. They have become markers of the last movements before stillness claimed the bunker. Above, the city has stopped fighting. The buildings that once shook with artillery now stand silent, leaning into their ruins. Streets lie buried under debris, rooms open to the sky that once protected them, windows stare outward with nothing left to reflect. The fires have begun to smolder into ash. Smoke rises not in desperate spirals, but in slow, exhausted curls, the final breath of a city long pushed beyond endurance. Down here, the bunker absorbs the silence. It fills every corner, every gap between stones, every breath drawn in the dim light. Even the hum of machinery sounds subdued, softened by the weight of what surrounds it. The rooms feel smaller, not because the walls have shifted, but because the air no longer holds the movements it once did. Absence has a shape now, and it lies quietly across the floor like a thin layer of shadow. A corridor leads to a room where a single lantern burns low. The flame trembles occasionally, its light thinning as the fuel disappears. It casts soft, wavering patterns on the wall, shadows that drift slowly, as though unsure whether to disappear or linger a moment longer. The flame bends, straightens, and bends again. In its dim glow, the room feels suspended between what was and what is coming. The last remnants of sound from the city above arrive as faint, muffled murmurs, fragments of collapse carried through the earth. They no longer resemble explosions. They feel like distant memories of noise, softened into something almost gentle. Eventually, even these echoes grow rare. The world above has fallen fully into quiet. In this final stillness, the mind turns inward. It begins to gather the fragments left scattered by fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty. The hours spent between these concrete walls, the whispers, the tremors, the drifting shadows, settle themselves into a shape that can be understood. The chaos of the outside world becomes something distant, held at arm's length by the thick walls and the slow rhythm of breath inside this forgotten chamber. Eventually, the lantern's flame grows thin, shrinking into a small, steady point of light. It flickers once, then steadies again. The quiet around it feels deeper now, fuller, carrying the weight of everything that has happened above and everything that has finally stopped happening. In that stillness, reflections begin to form, not dramatic, not sharp, but soft and slow, shaped by the recognition that even endings have their own quiet dignity. This is the moment when the bunker's silence becomes a kind of teacher. It reminds you that history is not only written in noise and fire, but also in the breath that follows, in the space where people pause, reflect, and try to understand what remains. It reminds you that the world often ends in whispers rather than thunder, and that the quiet after destruction carries its own truth. You breathe in the last of the bunker's stillness, and the silence settles gently around you. It is neither comforting nor frightening. It simply exists, holding the memory of everything that happened above and below, carrying it forward in the way only silence can. And as you listen to that silence, the silence that follows collapse, the silence that remembers, you step softly into the echo of what remains. You've been part of echoes of war, where stories rise on quiet wings, and the past still circles above us, refusing to land.